Good evening, and welcome back to 31 Horror Nights. It's October 29th, and tonight's movie is 28 Days Later. Yes, this is 28 days after I started this, and yes, that is a coincidence. 28 Days Later is the big one. Out of all the movies I've watched this month, this is the one that's the most infamous. This is the closest to a classic we're ever really gonna get. Released in 2002, 28 Days Later is a British horror movie about a zombie apocalypse, and since then it has gained notoriety as being one of the greatest zombie films ever made. So, 15 years after its release, how does it hold up? For the most part, I would say pretty well. I'm giving 28 Days Later an 8 out of 10. The plot of 28 Days Later is that there's this man named Jim who is in a coma. He got in like a car crash, and he wakes up to a completely deserted hospital. He gets up, gets dressed, tries to leave, and he sees nobody. He walks out into the city, and this is downtown London, and there is nobody. That is one of the most effective parts in the entire movie. The shots where Jim is just walking around London and there's nobody there. There's something so eerie about it. Eventually, he finds out what happened. Just 28 days before, when he got into the coma, a sort of apocalypse happened. There was a virus that was in some monkeys that were being tested in a lab, and then a bunch of animal rights activists broke in and let the monkeys free, and that disease affected the humans. Now, they don't actually use the word zombie in the movie, or at least I'm pretty sure they don't, but the effect that it has on a person is a lot like a zombie, except in this one, they run, and they run fast. I believe that this and Resident Evil were the first ones to really pioneer the fast zombie archetype. Jim meets up with a woman named Selena, and the rest of the movie is about their journey and the people they meet and the mission to survive. Now, going into this, I always just sort of assumed that 28 Days Later was either the directorial debut or one of the first movies directed by someone who was, for all intents and purposes, a nobody, because that's the case with a lot of the movies I've watched this month. But I looked it up, and that is absolutely not the case with 28 Days Later, and its director, Danny Boyle. He has directed several critically and commercially successful movies both before and after the release of this movie, like Trainspotting, Steve Jobs, 127 Hours, and Slumdog Millionaire. I think you could forgive me for thinking otherwise, though, considering what this movie looks like. There are good things in 28 Days Later, and I will get to them, but the base thing throughout the entire movie that doesn't work is how the movie looks. I'm pretty sure it looked like this was shot on a potato even in 2002. The colors don't look good, the resolution doesn't look good, the exposure doesn't look good, nothing about this movie looks good. Considering that the people behind this movie could afford to have the streets of London evacuated to film a scene, I thought this was weird even when I thought that this was an indie movie. But considering that it's not, I have no idea why they chose to make the movie look so bad. They could obviously afford better camera equipment. Apparently, traditional film cameras are too big and bulky to really be practical when shooting the scenes of London being deserted. That might be true, but that seems like more of a reason to get creative and figure out a way to have it work than instead make the rest of the movie look like garbage because you shoot it all on a mini DV cam. This makes 28 Days Later feel like a home movie instead of what it actually is, this big budget production. That was something that was in the back of my mind during the entire runtime. Still, it's not like this totally ruined the movie. The editing and cinematography was pretty good, and there were a lot of other good things that sort of distract you from the video quality. Zombies as a concept are scary enough, but when you add the fact that they could actually outrun you given the chance is something else completely. And they really work with that. There's a scene in the movie where a group is in a car and they're driving out of the city through a tunnel and they get a flat in the middle of the tunnel. So instead of driving out of it and changing the tire there, they decide to change the tire inside the tunnel. So while they're fixing the tire, they hear the zombies approaching. And in this case, they don't have that much time once they hear that. They need to get in the car and go now. Another thing they set up about these zombies is that the way you get infected is by getting their blood in you, like in your mouth, or if you get bitten by them. And what they establish is that it takes less than 30 seconds for you to get the disease after you get infected. It takes less than a minute for you to turn into this ravenous, bloodthirsty monster with no humanity or conscience. That's something that's absolutely terrifying to think about. He doesn't just find Selena at the very beginning of the movie. Jim also finds this other guy, and they go to a place and they get attacked, and the other guy gets bitten. And what Selena does is that she kills him right then and there. Like, the second that she sees that he got bitten, she just takes a machete and cuts him to pieces. She makes it clear that she would do exactly the same thing for Jim, so that adds another little bit of tension between the two of them. I really like the soundtrack of 28 Days Later. I knew about one of the songs, In the House in a Heartbeat, which I loved for a long time and have used on my channel before because it sounds really good. And they do use that, and it's pretty effective when they actually use it in the movie, but I feel like they used it in the wrong place. I think that with a little bit of tweaking, that could have been used in the shots where he's walking around London while it's completely deserted. For the most part, 28 Days Later has a good enough story and characters to make up for its absolutely abysmal production quality. It's absolutely not one of the best horror movies I've ever seen, but it's still pretty good, and is a bit of a unique specimen in its own right. Not to mention how it influenced a bunch of other movies and stories down the line. If you're interested, I would say check it out. Now let's talk about a few spoilers. After the third person in their group gets killed, Selena and Jim walk around London and they see an apartment or like a condo in this big building with a bunch of lights flashing in the window indicating that there are people there. They go there and they meet a father and daughter duo. And while they're there, they hear something on the radio that's a recording of people saying, "We have a safe haven, come to blah blah blah, and we will protect you." Now, they decide that going there is better, at least, than staying in that building until they starve to death, so they go and check it out. And after a little road trip, they make it to, like, the outskirts of the city, and they look in, and the entire city is on fire in the distance. Once they get closer, they see what looks like a security checkpoint or, like, a border, and nobody's there. And when they look around, the father, like, looks up, and then a piece of blood that's, like, dripping on top of the building lands in his eye. And that's a really good, like, uh-oh moment, because you know that he's going to be transformed in less than a minute. So he says goodbye to his daughter, and she wants to, like, come out to him, but he keeps saying, like, get away from me. And it comes to the point where, like, Selena literally has to hold her back, and a bunch of snipers that were hanging out in the woods shoot him down. When they get to the safe haven, they learn more about the layout and the people who live there. One of the soldiers there actually did get infected, but they, like, chained him to something and put him in a courtyard so that they could study him and examine him and learn stuff about the infection. And yes, this story arc ends exactly how you think it would. All of the soldiers at the compound are male, and the big source of conflict is that the leader of all of them, like, promised that there would be a future in it. And to them, a future means, like, procreating and having children. So they are fully prepared to rape the two women in the group, well, not even women, one woman and one girl in the group, the daughter and Selena, so that they could procreate. Obviously, all three of them have huge objections to this, but the people in the compound overpower them, and they try to kill Jim, but he manages to escape. But in his escape, he goes over the wall encircling the entire place, so they assume that he just dies, considering that he goes out into zombie territory. But the rest of the movie is Jim trying to infiltrate the facility to rescue the two girls. And he is absolutely ruthless in his mission. One of the first things he does is that he lets loose the zombie that they were keeping alive as a test subject. And he goes around and he wreaks havoc. Another one gets bitten and infected. And now you got two of the infected running around the facility. He's so vicious that when he saves Selena, Selena legitimately thinks that he got infected. He wasn't, but I definitely thought that it was kind of overkill what he ended up doing. He and the two infected make short work of pretty much everybody at the compound. And by the way, there was actually a pretty good scene where Hannah is in a room and she hears one of the infected coming in. So what she does is that she hides behind a mirror and she has to, like, grab onto it and, like, lift up her legs so that you couldn't even see her feet when you look down. And there's this pretty effective scene of her just standing there trying not to move a muscle or make a sound as the zombie is right on the other side of the mirror, like, looking at it. That I thought was pretty good. So the group manages to escape. Jim gets injured, but they make it out alive. And it cuts to a long time later. They're in this little cottage in what I think is Wales. And Jim wakes up and he's healed. And what they do is that they take a bunch of fabric and, like, make the word hello in a field right outside their house. And they actually do manage to get spotted by a plane that's flying overhead. By most standards, 28 Days Later is a pretty brutal movie, but I also thought it was pretty well executed and interesting. I don't think it's quite as good as everybody says it is, but it is a very interesting watch. It still holds up, and its influence can still be felt even today. If you're interested, I would definitely say give it a watch. Alright, I'll see you tomorrow.